In the bustling markets of ancient Antioch, where merchants haggled over precious silks and exotic spices beneath the Syrian sun, there lived a man who understood that the deadliest weapon in commerce was not gold or connections, but silence about one's true intentions. For in a world where every whispered plan could become tomorrow's betrayal, the wise merchant learned that revealing your hand was the same as surrendering your future. The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone courtyard of the great bazaar as Basilios Cantacuzénos adjusted the folds of his modest brown robe and prepared for what would become the most crucial negotiation of his life. At 28, he was neither the wealthiest nor the most connected merchant in Antioch, but he possessed something far more valuable than inherited riches. A mind that could see 3 moves ahead and the discipline to keep his true thoughts locked behind a pleasant smile. Today, he would either secure the exclusive contract that would make him the most powerful silk trader in the Eastern Empire, or he would watch his dreams crumble like ancient parchment in the desert wind. The difference would come down to a single principle that separated the survivors from the forgotten. Never let anyone know what you truly want. The silk trade was the lifeblood of Antioch, connecting the distant looms of China to the purple-clad nobility of Constantinople. Merchants who controlled even a small portion of this golden river could build fortunes that lasted generations. But for the past 5 years, that river had been dominated by one man, Theodoros Lascaris, a merchant prince whose family had held the imperial silk monopoly since the reign of Justinian. Lascaris was everything Basilios was not. Tall, where Basilios was average. Aristocratic, where Basilios was common-born. Confident, where Basilios was careful. He owned a palatial villa overlooking the Orontes River, employed a private army of guards and accountants, and wore silk robes so fine they seemed woven from captured moonlight. More importantly, he held the exclusive rights to purchase silk directly from the Persian caravan routes, making him the gatekeeper through which all other merchants had to pass. But even the mightiest river could change course, and Basilios had spent 2 years quietly preparing for the moment when it would. The opportunity had come in the form of disaster. 3 weeks earlier, a plague had swept through the silk-producing regions of Persia, decimating not only the population, but destroying the delicate infrastructure needed to maintain the trade routes. Overnight, the steady flow of silk that had enriched the Eastern Empire for centuries had slowed to a trickle. Prices had tripled, supply had vanished, and panic had begun to spread through the merchant community like wildfire. While his competitors scrambled to secure whatever scraps of silk remained in the warehouses of Damascus and Aleppo, Basilios had done something different. He had smiled, nodded sympathetically at their panic, and quietly continued his daily routine as if nothing had changed. He attended the morning auctions, made his usual small purchases, and spent his afternoons sipping wine in the taverns, where merchants gathered to share gossip and despair. What none of them knew was that for the past 18 months, Basilios had been secretly cultivating a relationship with a network of Byzantine monks who had recently returned from a legendary mission to the far reaches of China. These monks, led by an enterprising abbot named Maximos, had accomplished something that had been deemed impossible. They had smuggled silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds out of China, hidden within their hollow walking sticks. The monks were now operating a small but growing silk production facility in the mountains outside Trebizond, far from the eyes of competitors and tax collectors. Their silk was not yet equal to the finest Chinese varieties, but it was genuine. It was increasing in quantity each month. And most importantly, it was completely outside the Persian trade routes that had just collapsed. Basilios had discovered this operation through a chance encounter with Brother Maximos in a Damascus tavern 6 months earlier. The monk, slightly drunk on Syrian wine and homesick for conversation, had let slip hints about their agricultural experiments in Trebizond. A lesser merchant might have immediately tried to buy silk from them or demanded exclusive access. Basilios had done something smarter. He had befriended the monk, provided financial support for their operation with no strings attached, and most crucially, had never once revealed his own profession. To Brother Maximos, Basilios was simply a wealthy young man with interests in theology and agriculture. Someone who appreciated the historical significance of their work and occasionally donated money to support their holy mission. The meeting that would change everything was scheduled for noon at the Golden Goblet, Antioch's most prestigious tavern and the unofficial headquarters of the city's merchant elite. Theodoros Laskaris had called an emergency gathering of all major silk traders to discuss their collective response to the Persian crisis. Publicly, it was positioned as a cooperative effort to stabilize prices and maintain supply chains. Privately, everyone knew it was Laskaris' attempt to consolidate his control over the remaining silk supplies and eliminate smaller competitors who could no longer afford the inflated prices. Basilios arrived early, as was his custom, and took a seat at a corner table where he could observe without being noticed. The tavern's interior was decorated with silk tapestries that told the story of Alexander's conquests, their colors still vibrant after decades of display. The irony was not lost on him. Like Alexander, he was about to conquer an empire, but he would do it not with armies, but with information that his enemies didn't know he possessed. One by one, the other merchants arrived, their faces marked by the strain of the past weeks. Marcus Aurelianus, the Roman who controlled the westbound routes to Italy, looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Constantine Ducas, whose family had traded silk for 3 generations, kept fidgeting with his rings in a way that suggested serious financial pressure. Even the usually confident Armenian trader Hov Hans seemed subdued, speaking in whispers with his accountant about inventory shortages. Theodoros Laskaris entered last, as befitted his status. But Basilios noted subtle changes in his demeanor. The merchant prince still wore fine silk and carried himself with imperial bearing. But there was tension around his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. He thought no one was watching. The plague had hurt him more than he was letting on. "Gentlemen," Laskaris began, settling into the chair at the head of their informal gathering, "we face the greatest crisis our industry has seen in living memory. The Persian roots that have sustained us for generations have been severed, perhaps permanently. We must adapt quickly or face ruin together." The conversation continued for another hour, with each merchant probing for details while trying not to reveal their own weaknesses. Basilios contributed little to the discussion, asking only occasional clarifying questions and maintaining the persona he had carefully cultivated. A competent but unremarkable trader who posed no threat to anyone's ambitions. That evening, as the sun set over the Orontes River and the call to evening prayers echoed from the city's minarets, Basilios sat in his modest quarters writing a carefully worded letter to Brother Maximos. The monk had no idea that his theological correspondent was about to become his business partner, and Basilios intended to keep it that way until the moment was precisely right. 3 days later, the first sign that his strategy was working came in the form of a panicked visit from Constantine Ducas. The older merchant arrived at Basilios' shop just after dawn, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled and his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Basilios, my friend," Ducas began, his voice carrying a tremor that betrayed his desperation. "I've heard troubling rumors. Some say that new silk has appeared in the Damascus markets, silk that doesn't match any known Persian or Chinese varieties." "Fascinating," Basilios murmured, allowing a note of curiosity to enter his voice. "Do we know who's behind it?" "That's the mystery. The silk appears in small quantities from different sellers, never enough to trace back to a single source. Whoever is orchestrating this has been very careful to avoid detection." The revelation came at the following week's consortium meeting, in a manner that would be discussed in Antioch's merchant circles for decades afterward. The same group had reconvened at the Golden Goblet, with Lascaris expecting to formalize their agreement and begin the process of consolidating control over the remaining silk trade. Instead, he found himself facing a situation that no amount of wealth or political connections had prepared him for. Basilios arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather satchel that had not been present at the previous meeting. He took his usual corner seat and waited patiently as the others settled into their places. About that uncertainty, Marcus Aurelianus interjected. "I assume we're all aware of the new silk that's been appearing in markets throughout Syria? This changes our situation considerably. I mean, no disrespect," Basilios continued, setting his leather satchel on the table with deliberate care. "But I believe the quantities may be larger than you realize. More importantly, I believe the source may be closer than any of us expected." He opened the satchel and withdrew a bolt of silk that made everyone in the room straighten in their chairs. The fabric caught the afternoon light streaming through the tavern's windows, revealing a lustrous quality that rivaled the finest Chinese imports, from the source. Basilios replied simply, "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Brother Maximos of Trebizond, who has developed what I believe represents the future of silk production in the Byzantine Empire." He gestured toward the tavern's entrance, where a middle-aged monk in simple brown robes was approaching their table, with the confident stride of a man who understood his own worth. Brother Maximos had arrived in Antioch that morning at Basilios's invitation, still believing he was meeting with potential supporters of his monastery's innovative agricultural projects. Over the next hour, Maximos explained the breakthrough that his monastery had achieved. The successful cultivation of silkworms using seeds and techniques acquired during their mission to the Far East. Their production was already sufficient to supply regional markets, and with proper investment and expansion, they could eventually challenge the Persian monopoly that had dominated the trade for centuries. Of course, Maximos added with a slight smile in Basilios's direction, "We would naturally expect our earliest supporter and advisor to receive certain considerations in recognition of his faith in our work." That phrase landed like a physical blow on Lascaris and the other merchants. In one carefully orchestrated moment, Basilios had revealed not only that he possessed access to an alternative silk supply, but that he had been cultivating this relationship for months, while they had been unaware it even existed. By the time the sun set over Antioch that evening, the balance of power in the Eastern Empire's silk trade had shifted permanently. Basilios, the modest merchant in brown robes who had never once revealed his true intentions until the moment was perfect, had positioned himself at the center of a new silk empire. Years later, when young merchants would ask Basilios for advice on navigating the complex world of Byzantine commerce, he would tell them about the importance of patience, preparation, and most critically, the wisdom of keeping one's true goals hidden until revealing them served a purpose. Information, he would say, is like silk thread. Properly woven, it can create something beautiful and valuable. But if you show the pattern too early, others can copy your design or tear the fabric before it's complete. In our modern world, this ancient wisdom remains as relevant as ever. The most successful leaders understand that there's a crucial difference between being dishonest and being strategic about timing. The lesson isn't to become secretive or manipulative, but to recognize that timing matters, that information has value, and that the wise person shares their hand only when doing so serves their larger purpose.